Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for your great talk, Gus, because you will come to this at the end of my talk. Okay, why election security matters. So I can talk about this forever, but I have to kind of speed up. So I'm just going to speak a little faster than usual. Okay, so the situation in the world is that we actually have voting technologies in elections, and they're coming more and more. And one of the classical example, of course, is the United States of America. Okay, and I know it's far away, but there's been discussion in Sweden about introducing internet voting, which I think has died down the excitement for it, which might be good. Denmark also kind of doesn't have it. Estonia has it. Australia has it. Lots of countries have it. And when you look at this map, you see actually in the United States, there's a lot of places that use these direct recording machines without any paper trail. Okay, so these are basically computer where you go to vote and you kind of have a touch screen and you press a button and you go home. And at the end, some result comes out. Okay, so the good thing about this is, of course, it's a machine. You can program it correctly. It would be much better if it had paper. And nowadays, there are newer machines that are optical scan machines and so on. One of the challenges is, lots of discussion is about, now, why don't we just use the blockchain in order to do voting? Okay, so I think I don't have to say why, because it is already, it's not a very good idea. Okay, so that's not the only, you know, there are optical scan machines and so on, but there's also internet voting in the US. Okay, and internet voting is even more scary, because now you suddenly have elections and you hold them in environments that are not controlled anymore. Right? You just kind of have people installing an app, and that's actually what the Estonians and the Australians are doing. So in Alaska, for example, all of the votes that come in from military personnel abroad actually comes in from, you know, over the internet. People have to download a ballot form, fill it out, and then kind of send it back. And then at the end, they might or might not count it correctly. Who knows what's happening? And as every problem in the world that we're trying to solve with technology, we should also be asking here the question, who actually is the adversary whom are we going to defend against? And you know, some people think like elections, the most boring topic ever. Okay? You go every 4 years, you make a cross on a piece of paper, and then, you know, there's a new government who controls you and who kind of sets your taxes and all of that stuff. Okay? But it actually turns out, in terms of security, it's the most exciting thing. Because if you can't solve security in the setting of elections, you're not going to solve it for many other cases. Okay? So who is the adversarial environment? So before the last election was an FBI flash. I mean, this is no joke. This is all serious stuff, yeah? So FBI actually noticed the intrusion of certain hackers into systems and warned the other states, or all of the states, to be very, very careful. And there was like Amber, it was like Amber FBI flash. This information's product is only for members in their organizations and those who directly need to know. I think that's all of the customers of such an election system, so the entire world. So those kind of things actually happen, right? So now one can ask, who actually is the adversary? And the adversary could be a nation state, and we have seen there have been reports now by the intelligence community about that the Russians have been accused of hacking the election. Okay, and yes, what do they hack? They have been accused of hacking the registration systems. That there was also always a little bit unclear on if they really hacked these election machines, these direct recording machines or not. Yes, there's a lot of sources to it. Now, it turns out, and this is like really, really new, okay, that's from September 1st, it's only 6 days old. Okay, Russian election hacking efforts wider than previously. So 22 states have been compromised by Russian operatives. And they've used phishing attacks, and we cannot know what kind of an impact that actually really had on the voter registration databases. I've just got an email that some German hackers from the Chaos Computer Club actually have shown that the systems that are going to be used in the German election in 3 weeks are very vulnerable. They use passwords like test. It's really scary. So this is one thing. So okay, yes, okay, nation states, they want to influence us. So what do we learn? It's like an election is actually a high-value target, okay? So we've seen it with all of the discussions around Trump and so on. And the risk of actually attacking something is extremely high. If you just have a small hole, you can kind of talk about, oh, what's the risk of somebody exploiting that hole? If you know this hole, the risk is 100%, okay? You have to get rid of all of those damn holes, and we do not know what the holes are because the infrastructure, it's complicated, it's distributed, and you don't actually have the right to see any of it, okay? How about insiders? Yes, the insider. That's always very often forgotten by election officials, people working in elections. There are thousands of people working in elections who have actually access to the systems. Okay, polling station workers, observers, and so on. They do system configuration, they kind of check hardware, and so on and so forth, yes? And I'm not sure if I'm preaching to the choir here, but there's one machine in Fallujah County in 2000 that ended up having minus 16,022 votes recorded for Gore. That's, of course, very difficult to explain for a system that has been, who knows? It must have been misconfigured. That's my best. Some people say it started counting backwards, which I mean, have you ever heard that the blockchain suddenly starts counting backwards? It just doesn't happen from anything. And you think like, oh, this could not possibly be. But see, again, August 21st, ex-election worker charged with altering 2016 primary votes. Okay, this stuff happens and it's really no joke. Okay. So this is a picture of such a machine. That's the WinVote 2000. And usually I travel with this machine, but this is my third stop on this trip, so I haven't brought it along. I actually have one in the office, and I went to DC to a conference, and some guy comes up to me and says to me, Carsten, do you want an election machine? I said, sure. I said, come with me. So we took the elevator, second floor underground, like in the movies, and there's a car parked, and he pops the trunk. It's full of election machines. And so I took one. Now I have this election machine. How do I get it to Copenhagen? I'm completely naive. I just put it and check it in as a regular piece of luggage, although there's a big sticker on the bottom which says it's a class 5 felony to tamper with this equipment. But nobody arrested me. Okay, so now I'm a security researcher, and you know, I got my PhD was actually automated reasoning. This is also why I asked the question earlier on mechanizing security proofs. But I always think like, you know, we have like your adversary model. What can an adversary really do? So I decided, that was Easter last year, why don't I just kind of try to see what kind of tools the hackers actually use? And so I found this distribution called Kali Linux. Many of you probably know it. And then I noticed these Metasploit. And I went to DEF CON this year. And I actually kind of demonstrated how you can control such a machine in no time, because it actually always has wireless on. So this is a tool, and this is just a movie. So there's a tool called Armitage, and it basically kind of looks for all vulnerabilities for the WinVote, which I connected to with the password ABCDE. You can imagine that this machine actually is next door. It doesn't matter, it still works. And then at the end it says like, you know, I did the attack. I mean, this is just kind of fun to see what actually happens. So now I found all of the attacks. The tool, Metasploit tool, has lots of things, so you can't read it, but it's something with 03. Okay, so that it finds a particular vulnerability. I'll try the vulnerability out. Okay, here's the Metasploit prompt. I set my own local host number to something. I set the remote host number to the IP address of the machine, which it voluntarily gave to me. It's really funny when you use Wireshark. It says like, hello, I'm a voting machine. Do you want to talk to me? Then you use the exploit, okay, which is Microsoft 03. It is from 2003, and you know, this machine was in, you will see it in a second, still in use. You have to give a payload, which is the little piece of code that you execute. You say exploit, and you're in, okay. Now you see here's the Windows prompt, and you can kind of surf around. There's a directory called WinVote, which is very suspicious that this might actually be the WinVote machine. So there are all of the last polling reports that were printed with the machine, so you can actually scroll through it. And I've actually hacked this machine live in front of the Commissioner of the United States, the Deputy Commissioner, I should say, of the Election Administration Commission, and he just didn't say anything. And you can also take complete control because it actually also have a virtual desktop open, okay? You can turn off the machine remotely if you want. And so I actually hacked this machine at DEF CON, and so so maybe you've heard about this. There was this guy who hacked this machine. So that was me. And the only reason why it was attributed to me is because I was slightly faster than the others who were also in the room. If I would have been number 2, nobody would have talked about me ever again. Okay. But anyway, so this is the machine. Okay, I have to click here on this side. And this was the first tweet from Robert McMillan, who is actually a Wall Street Journal journalist, who says, like, greetings from DEF CON voting village, where it took 140 for Carsten Schürmann to get remote access to this WinVote machine. And the interesting thing is, 2 things are interesting. I never touched the machine. I just came in, I opened my laptop, and I turned off the machine. So the press was really kind of, they said, like, oh, this is kind of weird. The second thing is, you can see is this machine, the one I hacked, was really used on August 19th, 2014, with an exploit from 2003. So you might wonder, why didn't they patch this? Now, this is a very good question, and I tell you, I can talk about this forever. I don't have so much time. The question is, it was certified. And once you certify something, you can't just install a random security patch, because it might break it will break the certification, but actually makes the thing more secure at the end. Okay. So this is it. Okay. Now, what do we learn from this? Now I'd like to kind of jump on a different level, because elections is not just technology. Elections is actually people and technology. And it has actually a lot to do with constitutional law. And in constitutional law, one of the main challenges is to kind of settle the big question between confidence and control. The confidence of the people who elect those who are going to control them, okay? And there's some kind of a civic battle going on. And it's also the United Nations says that, actually, right? The Declaration of Human Rights, it says, you should actually have genuine elections, with universal and equal suffrage, in order to kind of, make sure that this civil tension between confidence and control continues to have a peaceful outcome. And it's not everywhere. So, I mean, Kenya election has just happened, which is kind of, I'm not sure how much you know about this, but, this is another talk for itself. Okay. So we need to have accountability. And accountability, we just heard also in the Bitcoin talk, on blockchain talk. So we need to have a legal framework that really kind of says, like, what is a valid vote? How do you count them? How is it transparent? And all of these principles. So the principles are really, really important in elections. And on the other side, there's also the technical framework, right? Which kind of uses technology everywhere. There's voter registration, there's advanced voting, there are stuff that happens on election day, and so on and so forth. So the question is, how do you build a system that you actually kind of can live with? The entire world is trying to figure this out, okay? So, and because of this, we are actually kind of moving towards a rather shaky grounds, right? We have seen already the United States is not in good shape when it comes to trust in elections right now, okay? But there's activities happening all over the place. And this is just e-voting, but there's a lot of experience also in the states down here, biometric voter systems and so on and so forth. Kenya, for example, has a biometric voter system. Sounds great, right? 1 person, 1 vote. You show your fingerprint and then you're in. However, what do you do if you notice that 1 month before the election there are 1 million more records in your voter database than there ought to be? So which one are you going to throw out? It's not easy. It's not easy. Okay. And everyone wants to have internet voting. So this is actually me. I went on a little mission in 2011 to the first Egyptian election, and this is General Komsan, who is actually responsible for holding the first free election in Egypt in 2011. And the first thing, after kind of gaining his trust, is that he asked me, when can we have internet election for Egypt? Because there had so and so many people live in Qatar, outside the area, we need to have internet election. And that is, of course, a question. But then how do you actually do when you have internet elections? How do you actually kind of go to do this? Now, I know that so what I want to do now is that we have in DemTech, as the lab that or the research project that I'm leading, we have kind of looked at voting protocols that can actually be used for this. And this particular, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of this to be a bit technical and not just, up on this guy. Okay, so we actually kind of thought like, there are now these hardware security modules where people store their bitcoins. Can't we use that thing? Many of you might have seen it, the tracer here. Can't we use that thing to give you an identity that, just for identity management? And, if you had one of those, everyone had one of those in their pocket, couldn't we use that for elections in some way? At the same time, we actually found there are something like linkable ring signatures. It's some work in crypto. It's a bit older now, but it has kind of got a revival more recently. And so we kind of developed an idea of a conditional linkable ring signature. That means that, you know, all of you people I put into one big ring, and you have a digital signature. And with that digital signature, you can kind of sign your vote. And we can check that it's a valid signature, but we do not know who of you actually kind of signed it. That's the property of these signature schemes. So we have extended this a little bit so that you actually have several identities. Every person can, depending on if you type or mistype the PIN code correctly, you can actually kind of you know, signal to the election commission if you have been coerced or not. We talk about red and green envelopes you put your ballots in. And then we use cryptographic mixes that actually produces zero knowledge proofs, so that at the end you can always check that the mix, the parallel mixing was correct. And at the end, you know, the last one is actually a decryption mixnet. You know, at the end you actually kind of get out a big bulletin board with all of the votes in the clear. Now, is that a good idea, this technique, or not? We don't know. It's going to be published soon. The algorithm looks a little bit like this. Okay, so you can send all of your encrypted ballots with the little sigma, which is your signature. The first phase actually kind of checks with this little green thing if your signature is okay. And then you have your pseudo identity, which is like these pairs back here. We don't have to worry about phi and theta. But so after you have done the first kind of cleansing, you know, which is all public on bulletin boards, you can kind of sort this stuff out. And this is what people do when they design actually internet voting protocols. It's like they are building protocols where you can have that kind of information on public bulletin boards so that people can always see and follow along, plus these cryptographic proofs. Now we have, after we have thrown out this one's that one's signature was wrong, this one's identity was wrong, so we kind of mix this, we have a mixed thing. Now we decrypt it in, these are the red one is a coerced vote, and so we kind of remove some of those votes, we mix again in order to kind of decrypt the votes, and at the end you see who voted for what, okay? So this is a rather complicated thing. Now, the German court actually said, like, Germany can't have, there was an election law which passed in 2005 that was unconstitutional because it's too complicated. That's also rather complicated for the average person to understand. But the question really is, like, you have to kind of get, whenever you design those kind of protocols, you have to keep in mind, you don't want to have single points of failure, you don't want to have individual persons that kind of, or a set of persons who control everything. You want to move as much of the hard work actually towards the voter so that you can kind of diversify your portfolio. Now we managed to kind of show that this particular protocol has some nice properties. I would still not recommend it in this current stage, but it has individual verifiability because everything is published on bulletin boards. So when something goes out and you kind of send your encrypted vote, you will be finding it on a board. When it's shuffled, there will be a cryptographic proof that you can check that the shuffle was correct, but you do not know anymore where your vote actually went. That actually helps us to protect a voter from a coercer because the coercer can't trace his votes through that system. The universal verifiability, because we have zero knowledge proofs of knowledge. We have the secrecy is depending on the crypto system that you use. We use Al-Gamal, but there are other things you could be thinking of. And of course the security parameter. It's receipt-free it's receipt-free because it has these two mixing phases and it's also coercion resistant. Okay. Now this is just one way, I think, in which if you really want to help the Egyptians, right, we'll have to do more research on those kind of protocols. We have to kind of really take it seriously. And the big challenge of any of that protocol is to kind of combine integrity and secrecy. So if you don't have, if you have a system without secrecy, it's relatively easy to kind of you know, convince everyone that everything is public, everyone can check. Yeah? But if you want to have secrecy, you know, then it's impossible to kind of convince everyone that everything was counted correctly. So that kind of balance is extremely hard to strike. And then if you're interested in all of these other things like coercion resistance, receipt-freeness, accountability, verifiability, and so on, it becomes an extremely, extremely hard and exciting research area. Now, my last two slides are about the blockchain. Okay. So the blockchain. So why don't we use blockchain voting? And when I prepared these slides, I thought like, there's probably lots of people who will say like blockchain is the best thing. So let me kind of just say, I don't think so. I don't think the blockchain is well suited for voting. And because of Gus, I don't actually have to make too many of those arguments because lots of these arguments were already made, okay? So the blockchain is now, so these are just two newspaper articles. Wouldn't that be great? How blockchain will disrupt our election system, how great it is to solve all of these problems with this, right? But you know, if you know that 33% of the Chinese have control and can change the election outcome, just imagine it's the Russians. They would have a lot of fun with that system. Okay, so, and I didn't know exactly when I prepared the slides how much was actually said about blockchain so far. So one way to think about it is just a gigantic whiteboard in the sky, okay? And the idea is you just kind of write on it with a permanent marker, and that is not a particularly technical definition, but this is how one can imagine. And so the idea of the people advocating for using blockchain for voting is just to kind of go out and, you know, you write everything in that sky and, you know, everyone can see it, and how great would that be, okay? And I think the blockchain actually has a role in elections, possibly. That is actually to kind of publish these bulletin boards of information that I've just shown you, so that you can kind of find your own stuff again. But other than that, there are lots of other things that we actually need. Okay, but we forget about this. So there are lots of other things that we need. Now, the blockchain is inherently decentralized. Elections are inherently centralized. So how do we combine those two things? Now, you might say, like, oh, it's easy. We just say centralized is stupid and decentralized is great. But, you know, remember what I've just said about you have to have the legal framework in place for this first. And this is also where actually, you know, the real hacking might take place, is that people do not understand exactly what they are getting themselves into when they change the laws. Technology is for now, the law is for forever, at least in principle. Okay, so next one is identity management. Yes, everyone can write in the cloud. Okay, fine. But how about, are all of these people eligible who are writing in the cloud? I made to make sure that nobody writes twice. Timeliness. The election ends, okay, and some of the miners decided that they actually are not interested in posting and binding any of the transactions that are for your elections in the blockchain. So that you might actually, you know, just imagine what if the election is about shall miners pay 40% tax on their gains, okay? So I'm pretty sure if the miner can figure out which ones are the transactions that pertain to that question, they're not going to post it ever. So there is a denial of services. There's okay, we have that already. Secrecy of the vote, okay, everything is public, so you need to have additional mechanisms to protect yourself. Universal verifiability. Dispute resolution. So in Mexico and in all of the countries around the world, there are special courts for settling electoral disputes. Now, what are we going to do about that when you have the blockchain, right? So coercion resistance and so on. Okay, so but nevertheless, some states are just plowing happily ahead, okay, like the Maine, okay, the resolve to study blockchain technology in conjunction with paper ballots in Maine elections is actually, that's not, I didn't make this up, so this is really stuff that's happening, right? So there are states actually kind of starting to work on legislation to permit this kind of technology. And I think that I'm starting to get more and more concerned about these things, even while I'm standing up here talking about it. So one has to make sure not to become an activist too much, because otherwise nobody listens to you. But still, ample warning would be a good idea. Conclusions. Okay. So election security, I think, is extremely important for the world we live in and for the society we live in. And it's not just about, you know, having a system that kind of adds up something correctly. It's about the trust, and it's about the legitimacy of the people we are voted for. And if you don't have that, you don't have much in your society anymore. And civil unrest might be the conclusion to this. So that's extremely scary. Like in Kenya in 2004, where 1,300 people died after the election. Okay, so then we have other things that are important, which go way beyond security requirements, that has to do with accountability. And from Gus's talk and the talk this morning, we actually know accountability is in the blockchain somehow, but it might not be precisely the same notion of accountability that we are looking for. But we also have to kind of worry about verifiability, including eligibility verifiability. And then the very big question is, like, if we really use internet voting and all of these blockchain voting technologies, what kind of an auditing technique can be built in order to kind of retroactively kind of create and generate trust in the election? So So I haven't talked about risk limit in audits that I had to cut out in, for the blockchain things. But some states, like Colorado, actually require that a certain number of ballots are being audited, by statistical means. And what that means is that you basically you look at the result and you compute the margins of how many votes would you have to change in order to make a difference in the election result. And then you try to kind of look at the real paper ballots in order to kind of find statistical evidence that tampering has happened. These kind of techniques are completely unclear to me how you would do this in a system where everything is electronic. With this, I'll stop. Thank you very much.